So by now you've heard the news. The very top officials in the Trump White House, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the head of American intelligence, and others took to a social media platform called Signal to discuss, are you ready, wartime secrets, the planning for an attack on U.S. enemies in the Middle East. What's wrong with this, you ask? Well, everything. Now, lots of people use Signal. It's been around for more than a decade, very popular among people like journalists, political activists, privacy experts, even politicians, anyone really who wants to communicate with their messages encrypted. It's a great privacy tool, and for most people, that's enough. That's all they need. But Signal has one flaw, and it's a big one. Its encryption technology is open source. You know what that means? That means the source is shared with the public. The software code is available to anyone, which can allow sophisticated hackers, say Russian or Chinese intelligence agencies, the opportunity to hack it. That is why the U.S. intelligence community and other federal officials are generally not allowed to install Signal on their government-issued devices. As you can see, the intelligence community, by the way, is a lot more than the CIA. Most folks don't know that. And yet, as I mentioned, the very top officials in the federal government were using Signal anyway to discuss highly sensitive military and intelligence information. One of those officials was actually in Russia at the time, if you can believe it, an even better opportunity for highly sophisticated Russian hackers. All this and more took center stage on Capitol Hill, where many of those officials who were involved in the chat appeared. One of them is Tulsi Gabbard. She's the Director of National Intelligence, overseeing the entire U.S. intelligence community. The person questioning her is Maine Senator Angus King. King's skepticism reflects his view that her answers make no sense.
According to open source reporting at 11:44 on the morning of March 15th, Secretary Hegseth put into this group text a detailed operation plan, including targets, the weapons we were going to be using, attack sequences, and timing. And yet you've testified that nothing in that chain was classified. Wouldn't that be classified? What if that had been made public that morning before the attack took place?
Senator, I can attest to the fact that there were no classified or intelligence equities that were included in that chat group at any time.
So,
and I
so
defer,
the attack sequencing and timing and weapons and targets you don't consider to should have been classified?
I defer to the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council on that question.
She defers to the Secretary of Defense and the entire National Security Council. She's the head of the entire U.S. intelligence community. The buck stops with her, as Senator King, laughing, reminds her.
Well, you're the head of you're the head of the intelligence community. You're supposed to know about classifications. So your testimony very clearly today is that nothing was in that set of texts that were classified. I'll follow up on Senator Wyden's question. If that's the case, please release that whole text stream so that the public can have a view of what actually transpired on this discussion. It's hard for me to believe that targets and timing and weapons would not have been classified. Well, let me move on.
This reminds me of a tweet that Gabbard herself posted a few days ago. She wrote, quote, "Any unauthorized release of classified information is a violation of the law and will be treated as such." Now, did the principals in this meeting release classified information? They probably thought that their discussions were secret and encrypted, but as I mentioned, America's enemies, the Russians and Chinese, are very sophisticated hackers. Signal is not supposed to be used. And when you are, say, the Vice President or Secretary of Defense, you're supposed to know these things. And that's not all that Gabbard, again, the head of the entire U.S. intelligence community, is clueless about. And by the way, that goes for someone else she supervises too, CIA Director John Ratcliffe. Here's another clip from their Senate hearings. This time the questioner is Arizona's Mark Kelly.
So I understand that DoD policy prohibits discussion of even what is called controlled unclassified information, or CUI, on unsecured devices. Are both of you aware of that DoD policy?
I haven't read that policy.
Not familiar with the DoD policy, but I would say that the Secretary of Defense is the original classification authority for DoD in deciding what would be classified information.
Now, the only reason we know that all this occurred is because somehow a top journalist here in Washington, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, here he is, was somehow added to the chat. Talk about sloppy. So Goldberg monitored the chat in which Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared deeply classified secrets.
He was texting war plans. He was texting attack plans. When targets were going to be targeted, how they were going to be targeted, who was at the targets, when the next sequence of attacks were happening. I didn't publish this, and I continue not to publish it because it felt like it was too confidential, too technical, and I worry, honestly, that sharing that kind of information in public could endanger American military personnel. But no, they were plans for the attack. And they were texted before the attack.
And there were things texted that you viewed as so sensitive, you did not even publish them in your report today.
I made the decision that the technical aspects of this, including what kinds of weapons packages, the attack sequencing, and so on, that's not necessarily in the public interest. What's in the public interest is that they were running a war plan on a messaging app and didn't even know who was invited into the conversation. I mean, it's an obvious, ridiculous security breach.
Goldberg, of course, is referring to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the one texting these war plans on an app he should not have been using. Hegseth denies the allegation, even though the White House itself confirms that the chat took place.
Nobody was texting war plans.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Goldberg says Hegseth is lying. The sensitive things that were discussed and which Goldberg was privy to, as he told CNN, he did not publish any of that. Things that Hegseth said were not published. Things that CIA Director John Ratcliffe said also were not published, and so forth. And yet Goldberg has been attacked anyway, with Hegseth and others just taking their cue from President Trump.
The person that was on just happens to be a sleazebag, so maybe that's just coincidence. I don't know. He's made up a lot of stories, and I think he's basically bad for the country, but
this is one way Washington works, a sleazy way that Washington works. When things go wrong, attack the messenger. Pay no attention to the message itself, just attack the messenger. That's the strategy. Deflect attention from the screw-up. Remember, it's not the job of a free press to be a cheerleader for anyone. It's to report what's going on with neither fear nor favor. That's why President Trump has spent a lifetime attacking the press. He has long feared its exposure of alleged corruption and incompetence. What happened in the chat room was Exhibit A of the latter.